The year was 1946. John Wayne was the undisputed king of Hollywood, a titan of the silver screen whose shadow loomed large over the American landscape. He had just conquered the global box office with the masterpiece Red River, solidifying his public image as the tough, uncompromising cowboy who could handle any threat with a draw of his pistol and a steady gaze. But as the cameras stopped rolling and the blinding studio lights finally dimmed, the Duke would drive home in his station wagon, not to a sanctuary of peace or a reward for his labor, but to a domestic battlefield more dangerous than any script he had ever performed. Behind the heavy, imposing oak doors of his sprawling Encino estate, a different kind of war was waging. It was a war defined by suffocating silence, the sudden crash of shattered glass, and a jealousy so toxic it literally poisoned the very air he breathed. The world saw a towering hero of justice. His neighbors, however, heard the muffled screams of a man in a cage. This is the harrowing, untold story of his marriage to Esperanza Chata Baur, the woman who didn't just break his heart, but very nearly took his life in a moment of alcohol-fueled madness. While the adoring public believed in the myth of the invincible, granite-faced John Wayne, the man himself was living in a domestic hell, terrified of the unpredictable, jagged fury waiting for him on the other side of his own front door. To truly understand the depth of this tragedy, we must travel back to the beginning, to the seductive, heavy heat of Mexico City in 1941. Wayne was there on a desperate vacation, a man trying to outrun the suffocating pressures of his failing first marriage to Josephine Saenz. It was in this vibrant, foreign setting that he first met Chata. She was stunning, with midnight dark hair and eyes that possessed a volcanic fire that captivated the actor instantly. She was the antithesis of his life in Los Angeles. She was everything his first wife wasn't: wild, fiercely passionate, and completely uninterested in the polite, rigid rules of Hollywood high society. For a man who felt increasingly trapped by the wooden expectations of his growing fame, Chata felt like pure, unadulterated freedom. They danced in dimly lit clubs until the dawn broke over the city, drank endless rounds of tequila, and laughed with a reckless abandon that Wayne hadn't felt in decades. He was utterly spellbound, caught in a whirlwind of exotic romance. He stubbornly ignored the frantic warnings of his closest friends who claimed to see a jagged darkness lurking just behind her magnetic charisma. He chose to ignore the terrifying fact that she possessed a volatile, hair-trigger temper that could explode without warning. He was in love, or perhaps more accurately, he was hopelessly addicted to the vibrant chaos she injected into his otherwise overly structured life. They married in 1946, fueled by the naive belief that raw passion alone would be a sufficient foundation to build a life upon. They were tragically, catastrophically wrong. The rot in the relationship began almost immediately, like a slow-moving poison, and it manifested in the form of a third, unwelcome presence in their home, Chata's mother. In a strategic move that would effectively doom the marriage from the start, Chata insisted that her mother move in with them permanently. The older woman held a deep-seated resentment for Wayne, viewing him as little more than a meal ticket, and together, mother and daughter formed a chillingly united front against him. They would frequently switch to Spanish, a language Wayne understood well enough to know he was being insulted, but couldn't speak fluently enough to defend himself, to criticize his character, mock his acting, and plan their entire lives as if he didn't exist. The Encino home, meant to be his castle, became a psychological fortress where the master of the house was treated like a bumbling, unwanted intruder. But the true, snarling demon in the marriage was the heavy consumption of alcohol. Both John and Chata were formidable drinkers, products of a hard-living era, but while John could maintain his composure and function on set, Chata became a terrifyingly different person under the influence. The alcohol stripped away her every inhibition and unleashed a searing paranoia that bordered on full-blown psychosis. She became obsessively convinced that Wayne was sleeping with every single leading lady he shared a scene with, turning every workday into a potential interrogation. The definitive turning point of this downward spiral came during the grueling filming of Angel and the Badman in 1947. Wayne was starring opposite the ethereal, beautiful, yet incredibly fragile Gail Russell. Russell was a painfully shy, anxious young actress who was genuinely terrified of the camera's unforgiving lens. Wayne, in his typical, almost paternal protective manner, took her under his wing, spending extra hours coaching her and helping her navigate the pressures of the production. To the outside world, it was an act of kindness. To Chata, this mentorship was a searing betrayal of their marriage vows. She became convinced, beyond any reason, that they were having a torrid affair. The jealousy didn't just bother her, it ate her alive from the inside out. When Wayne finally returned home late from the dusty set one evening, his bones aching and his clothes smelling of stale tobacco and desert wind, the ultimate explosion happened. The specific details of that horrific night have been whispered about in the dark corners of Hollywood for decades, but the reality was far more terrifying than any urban legend. A drunken, hysterical Chata didn't just scream accusations, she launched a lethal physical attack. According to terrified witnesses and later, harrowing court testimonies, she reached for a loaded .45 caliber pistol, a heavy service weapon Wayne kept in the house for their protection. As the biggest movie star in the world walked through his own front door, his wife leveled the barrel directly at his chest. Take a moment to truly imagine that scene. The man who had faced down countless outlaws, armies, and monsters on the silver screen, standing frozen in his own dimly lit hallway. He was staring directly into the bloodshot, unrecognizable eyes of the woman he loved, realizing with a sickening jolt that she was actually about to pull the trigger. And she did. She pulled the trigger with the full intent to kill. Whether it was the heavy hand of the alcohol affecting her aim, or a genuine moment of divine intervention, the heavy slug missed Wayne's head by mere inches. It slammed into the hardwood wall behind him with a bone-shaking thud, sending shards of plaster and white dust exploding into the stagnant air. The deafening, metallic bang echoed through the house, followed immediately by a heavy silence that felt even louder and more oppressive. John Wayne, the man of action, didn't fight back in that moment. He didn't draw his own weapon or strike her. He simply stood there, the color draining from his legendary face, realizing that the wild spirit he had fallen so hard for in Mexico had transformed into a literal, lethal force of nature. He fled the house that night, his hands shaking, but incredibly, he returned just a few days later. Why would he go back? Because the Duke didn't quit. He was a man of his era. He possessed a deep-seated hero complex that made him believe he could fix her, that he could save her from her own demons. It was a noble sentiment, but it was a delusion that nearly destroyed his career and his sanity. For 7 long, agonizing years, this toxic cycle of abuse continued unabated. It was a repetitive rhythm of violence, followed by tearful, drunken apologies, more drinking, and then renewed violence. Chata's rage was physical and frequent. She would hurl heavy objects at his head, brass lamps, crystal vases, whiskey glasses, anything within her reach. Wayne would often arrive at the movie studio the next morning with deep scratches on his face or dark, mottled bruises on his arms. The makeup department, seasoned professionals who had seen everything, would quietly and expertly cover the marks with heavy foundation without ever uttering a single question. The crew knew the truth. The directors saw the pain. The studio heads were terrified of a scandal, but no one spoke a word. This was the era's ironclad code of silence. The mighty, masculine John Wayne could never be presented to the public as a victim of domestic abuse. It would have shattered the carefully constructed myth of his invincibility and ended his career instantly. So, he endured the humiliation in silence. He buried himself in his work, signing on to movie after movie, often 3 or 4 a year, just to have a legitimate excuse to avoid going home. His career soared to new heights, but his inner soul was being ground into dust. He began drinking even more heavily himself, using the bottle to numb the constant, throbbing pain of his domestic life. The immense stress began to manifest physically. His legendary stamina started to crack, his gait slowed, and the lines on his rugged face deepened, not from the natural passage of time, but from a profound, soul-deep sorrow. The final, ugly end of the nightmare finally arrived in a cold courtroom in 1953. The divorce trial was an absolute media circus, a public spectacle of the highest order that humiliated Wayne to his very core. Chata's high-priced lawyers were ruthless and predatory. They stood before the world and accused him of horrific physical abuse, of rampant infidelity with his co-stars, and of being a hopeless, violent drunk. They tried with everything they had to paint the great American hero as a drunken monster. But this time, Wayne fought back with the only weapon he had left, the unvarnished truth. Under oath, he revealed the details of the shooting incident. He spoke of the terrifying nights he had to physically lock his bedroom door just to sleep safely. He revealed the crushing emotional torment of living with a woman who seemed to hate him with the same intensity that she once loved him. The judge, seeing the clear pattern of Chata's instability, eventually ruled in Wayne's favor, granting the divorce. But while he won the legal battle, the personal damage was permanent. The trial had dragged his private agony into the harsh sunlight for the entire world to dissect. He walked out of that courthouse a legally free man, but he was fundamentally changed. The bright, boyish optimism he had carried in his early films was gone forever, replaced by a hardened, weary, and deeply protective cynicism that would go on to define his most iconic later roles. Chata's personal fate was as tragic as the marriage itself. Without the stabilizing presence of Wayne, she spiraled even deeper into the abyss of her addictions. She was found dead just a year later, in 1954, alone in a nondescript hotel room in Mexico City. When Wayne received the news of her passing, he didn't speak for a very long time. Those closest to him at the time claimed they saw him weep, not for the volatile woman who had tried to shoot him in cold blood, but for the vibrant, laughing girl he had first met in 1941, the woman who had once been his beautiful escape before she became his living prison. He never spoke her name in public again for the rest of his life. It was a dark chapter he closed and locked away in the back of his mind, much like the physical memory of that bullet hole hidden behind the wallpaper of his hallway. He carried the secret of his survival like a heavy stone, a reminder that the most dangerous enemies aren't always found on a battlefield, but sometimes they share your bed. Today, when we sit down to watch John Wayne's powerhouse performances from the late 40s and early 50s, in masterpieces like Sands of Iwo Jima, The Searchers, or The Quiet Man, we can see a haunting new depth in his eyes that wasn't there before. We see the eyes of a man who intimately understands betrayal, physical pain, and the terrifying fragility of a human life. At the time, critics praised his mature and nuanced acting style, but they didn't know the dark source of that performance. That pain wasn't a product of acting school. It was the heavy residue of the nights he spent listening for the sound of a gun in his own home. It was the result of years spent wondering if the woman sleeping next to him would be the one to finally end his story. The sad truth of John Wayne isn't just that he eventually died of cancer. It's that he lived for a decade with a shattered heart, hiding his profound vulnerability behind a wide-brimmed cowboy hat, forever protecting his audience from the truth that even the strongest, most iconic men can be brought to their knees by a toxic love. This was the curse of Chata, the secret, lonely war that the Duke fought entirely by himself, and the only battle of his life that he was truly grateful to simply survive.